This building is known for housing inmates who are too dangerous for other prisons. Welcome to the countdown of the most notorious prisons around the world. The first is ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. This is the U.S. federal supermax where inmates are kept under extreme control. Cells are tiny concrete boxes, furniture is bolted down, doors are electronically controlled, and prisoners typically spend around 23 hours a day alone. Movement is ritualized. Showers, medical visits, and meals are all done with doors and corridors operated by remote control to minimize contact. The facility was built to hold people who are considered too dangerous, too escape-prone, or too likely to coordinate crime from inside other prisons: terrorists, cartel bosses, spies, and serial killers. The psychological effect is deliberate. Long-term sensory restriction, near-constant light, noise control in some units, and extreme isolation have led to repeated criticism from human rights groups and legal challenges that call the regime cruel and damaging to mental health. Several household name criminals have been at ADX: Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, sentenced to life and moved to ADX after his U.S. conviction. The Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, who was transferred to ADX after sentencing. Terry Nichols, who got the longest prison sentence in history. He was one of the perpetrators of the Oklahoma City bombing, taking 161 lives. He got 161 life sentences, plus 9,300 years. Some of the others are Richard Reed and Zacarias Moussaoui. Even the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, served time in the federal supermax system. He died in prison in 2023. ADX's mix of stainless security tech, tiny cells, and very restricted outdoor time is designed to remove every advantage an inmate might use to organize, escape, or harm others. But it's also the reason ADX is at the center of debates about solitary confinement's human cost. Black Dolphin Prison, Soledetsk, Russia. Black Dolphin is reserved for Russia's most dangerous convicts: serial killers, terrorists, cannibals, and lifers. It's an old fortress-like complex near the Kazakhstan border with about 700 inmates. The security choreography is extreme and intimidating. When prisoners are moved, they are often blindfolded, made to walk bent at the waist with hands cuffed behind them, and every corridor or yard is observed constantly by guards and cameras. Cells are effectively a cell within a cell. Multiple layers of bars and doors, and inmates are closely checked. Guards say they do rounds every 15 minutes, and there are motion detectors and CCTV everywhere. Exercise time is short. Reports commonly say around 90 minutes per day, often in a concrete pen, and the food and living conditions are austere. Black Dolphin also holds some notorious and gruesome names, among them Vladimir Nikolaev, widely reported as a convicted cannibal, along with numerous serial killers whose combined crimes are often described in reportage as staggering. Documentaries and insider accounts, including National Geographic broadcast features and reporting by outlets like Business Insider, emphasize that inmates are effectively isolated for life, subject to relentless supervision and strict routines, and that the prison's reputation is as much about deterrence and containment as it is punishment. Kwang Central Prison, Nonthaburi, near Bangkok, Thailand. Nicknamed the Bangkok Hilton, darkly and often ironically, Kwang is Thailand's maximum security men's prison that houses long-term inmates and death row prisoners. Historically, it's been infamous for extreme harshness. New inmates are made to wear leg irons for the first months of a sentence, and in the past, death row shackles were reportedly welded on. That practice officially ended in recent years. Overcrowding, brutality, and poor medical care have been themes in survivor accounts. The Australian book The Damage Done, Warren Fellows, and long-form reporting lay out a picture of beatings, sanitary horrors, and the psychological tactics prison staff use to control prisoners. Kwang's regime also includes severe punishments like kun deo, a Thai solitary confinement practice described by former inmates, forced labor, poor food, and limited access to adequate medical care. Because the prison holds many foreigners convicted of drug offenses, tales of culture shock and extreme suffering by foreign inmates have also shaped international coverage, making Kwang a go-to example when Western audiences ask, how bad can a foreign prison be? Maracaibo National Prison, La Sabaneta, Venezuela. La Sabaneta in Maracaibo became a symbol of how quickly prisons can collapse into gang-run microstates. Built for a few hundred inmates, it ballooned into the thousands, with reports of 3,700 inmates squeezed into space for a fraction of that. Overcrowding here wasn't just uncomfortable, it produced periodic massacres and routine violence. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty documented episodes where large numbers of prisoners died in riots, fires, and violent purges. One of the most notorious incidents was the January 1994 riot with a huge death toll. Inside gangs, prans, controlled wings, some leaders ran bars, prostitution and drug sales from behind bars. In the final years before it was closed, press reports described wardenless corridors, private pools for gang bosses, inmates keeping animals, and even running informal economies, a terrifying inversion of custody. Because many inmates were pre-trial detainees, the chaos also highlighted systemic judicial failure, people awaiting trial mixed with convicted gang leaders, creating lethal dynamics. La Sabaneta was officially closed in 2013 after repeated violent incidents, but it remains an emblem of how neglect, corruption, and overcrowding turn prisons into fatal environments. Hwaryong Camp 22, Kwanli-so No. 22, North Korea. This is not a normal prison. It's a political concentration camp where entire families have historically been detained for guilt by association, often forever. Sources assembled by NGOs and defectors describe sealed, remote complexes with tens of thousands of prisoners forced into slave labor, held in dire conditions, denied meaningful medical care, and subjected to torture, executions, and starvation. Because the DPRK denies these camps' existence, most information comes from survivor testimony, satellite imagery, and NGO reconstructions. But that testimony is consistent and horrific. Small children born inside camps, brutal forced labor quotas in mines or farms, beatings, and whole villages cut off from the outside world. In mid-February 2012, a female political prisoner escaped Camp 22, along with the facility's Director of Operations driver. She was being smuggled out inside the car of the Director of Operations, hidden so as to avoid inspections at the checkpoint inside the camp. The two drove about 60 kilometers, 37 miles from the camp, heading toward the China border, eventually crossing the frozen Tumen River into China. This escape was crucial. Sources say it directly prompted Kim Jong-un, who was newly in power, to order the camp's closure in mid-2012, partly because the escape was seen as a major embarrassment. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and watch Part 2.